today's video is one that I'm very excited about, and that's where we take this Lenovo Smart Clock 2 and install custom Android apps on it. So this is the Lenovo Smart Clock 2, and it was released probably just over a year ago, and it's one of those sort of Google Home Assistant type clock things. So you set it up, it connects to your Google account, you can ask it for the weather forecast or your calendar or various questions, things like that, and it'll display them on the screen. Other than that, it's very locked down. However, on the XDA developers forum, someone's found an exploit that lets you kind of use the accessibility features on this and a couple other very weird hacks to get a web browser open, install custom Android apps, where you can then install a launcher and then install apps and basically break out of its sort of Google Home walled garden and set up running your own apps. And in this case, what I'll be doing is installing a web browser and setting it up to display my Home Assistant dashboards. And this will be really nice to have a little bedside Home Assistant dashboard that I can use to control the lighting. I'm building a thing where I have an alarm clock that turns on the lights in the room, so it'll be good to control that. Things like the AV system in the bedroom, again, being able to control it from this next to the bed will be really nice. So obviously it wasn't me that discovered this, it was someone in the XDA developers forum, so I've put a link in the description to sort of cite them. But I thought it'd be interesting to demonstrate this on video, because it's quite an interesting, surprising quirk and how you're actually able to get into it and do this. Because obviously these devices are designed to be fairly locked down. And I've seen lots of these smart clocks on the market, and I've always wondered, can I install an app on this? Can I do custom stuff with that? But this is the first time that I've seen one that is actually currently, you can actually exploit it, break out of the walled garden, and install custom apps on this. So yeah, it's a very nice little device. The current state of this is an interesting one. I'm not sure if it's still made. If you look on a lot of retailers, they still list it, but they list it as out of stock. And then the Lenovo website lists it as coming soon. So I don't know if they're either having stock issues and therefore it's not currently available, or if it's been discontinued and the Lenovo website's displaying it weirdly. However, these are not very expensive. If you're buying these new, they're about £60 if you can find them in stock. However, I think around about December time, these were all on sale for about £25 in Currys, so you can get them really cheap. And then because they were sold so cheaply in Currys, I think a lot of people bought them, then didn't really need them, so then sold them on. So I picked this one up second hand. There's quite a few on eBay, places like CEX, those sorts of places do sell them. So even though they don't seem to be in stock in a lot of places right now, they may come back into stock, or check around eBay and various sort of second hand marketplaces, because you can pick these up quite cheaply. And to be honest, even at the full retail price of £60, for this sort of hardware, being able to run your own custom Home Assistant dashboards on it, it's really, really nice. So yeah, we'll do a quick look at the hardware. Nothing that exciting, it's a pretty small thing. Smaller than I thought it would be, but not really a problem. And it's got this sort of cloth covering. It's available in different colours. It's available in grey, black and blue. I didn't really want the blue one, but it's what turned up. I ordered it from CEX and that's the colour that happened to turn up. I ordered it not forgetting that there was different colours, so I just ordered it and didn't list the colour and it turned out to be blue. I've got a blue wall behind my bed, so I can kind of argue that that matches it, so it's fine. But yeah, they do different colours. Screen on the front. Can't remember the resolution. I think something like 800 by 480, but don't quote me on that, not 100% sure. On the top you've got two buttons. This is a volume control up and down. These will be very useful for what we're trying to do on this. Around the back you've got a DC barrel jack, a microphone mute switch. There's a speaker in here that actually does sound pretty good. And then on the bottom you'll see there's these little pogo pin things. I think this is only available on the US models, where it comes with a sort of docking base that it sits on top of that connects over those. And that provides a wireless charging pad that sits next to it, as well as a USB port on the back for powering devices, but that doesn't seem to be sold with the UK models, or maybe it's an optional extra, I'm not sure, so I've not got that, but I didn't really want that anyway. So that's it there. The only other thing you get in the box is a mains power supply, which is the standard, I think it's 12 volt power supply, and it's just a standard sort of power brick. So yeah, you've got this sort of power supply here. It's a little bit annoying it's 12 volts, because if this was 5 volts I could power it from a USB power supply I've already got next to the bed, but oh well, it'll do. I suspect it has to be higher voltage because of the fact this may, in certain markets, have an optional wireless charging pad, so they probably want that higher power there. But yep, so we can do this and plug it in, so we'll get the box out of the way, and we'll plug it in. So, turn it on there, and that should then start up. Now, the way this exploit works is what you first will need to do is get this set up through your Google Home app. So you need to get it set up, connected to a Google account, and working as though it would normally be for someone who's just using this normally. Oh, it also helps me turn the power on to that. Would explain why it wasn't booting up. There we go. So let's wait for that to start up. So the way this exploit works is what you need to do is set it up as though you're just going to use it normally. So you install the Google Home app, you connect it to your Google Home app, you set it all up, do all that kind of stuff, and you just need to get it working so you can ask it questions and get it to read them back. And at that point, you can start going through the process to break out of this walled garden. So this isn't my absolute preference. When it comes to modding smart home devices, I much rather get them and just be able to get out of this sort of locked down cloud-based environment without even setting up an account.
Google Assistant. I'm here to help. To get started, please download the Google Home app on a phone or tablet.
It's talking to me. So yeah, I'd rather be able to exploit these sorts of things without having to set up the Google account, but with this one, you do need to do that. But all I'm going to do is set it up using a second Google account, not my main Google account, on a spare phone, just to get it set up, and once you've broken out of it, you don't need to use that Google account again. So yeah, as you can see, it's now started up, and it's sitting at the screen asking me to set it up. So what that wants me to do is install the Google Home app on my phone, sign into a Google account, and this will automatically find it on the network. Now, I'm not going to demonstrate that process on camera just because it's a bit boring and long-winded, and it's pretty self-explanatory and all built into the wizard, and the instruction manual explains it. So what I'll do is I'll go away off camera, get this all set up with the Google Home app, and come back when it's working. Okay, so the device is all set up. So we can see it working, so if I just say, hey Google, what's the weather like?
It's currently 2 degrees with snow showers there. Tonight, the forecast is around 1 with snow showers. Due to current wind conditions, it feels like it's -3.
So as you can see, that's it working just as a standard voice assistant. So that's obviously the device working as a Google Assistant. But what we really want to do is obviously break out of this sort of Google Assistant environment and install our own apps. Now, if you've ever done stuff with Android before like this, you'll know that the first step is to install a launcher. On Android, a launcher is essentially this thing here. Ignore the old phone, I'm just using this to set this device up. But what you'll find is on this device here, you can see this is the launcher. So the launcher is the thing that provides the home screens, the app drawers, all that kind of stuff. On this device, because it's locked down, the launcher is actually the Google Home Assistant itself. So when it starts up, it launches this. So what you really need to do is install a custom launcher and set it as default. So when it starts up, instead of coming into this Google Home environment, it starts up to a launcher that's a bit more like this, which you can then use to launch custom apps. So the first thing we need to be able to do is download APK files, which are Android application packages, and install them onto this device. And generally to do that, you need a web browser. But how are you going to get a web browser on this? It's very locked down. You can't just say, open a browser and it'll do it. It won't do that. So you need some way to open up a web browser. And this is where the interesting thing that someone found out. You can do that using the accessibility features. It's not designed to allow you to open a web browser, but there's a way you can do it. So what you need to do is, on the Google Home app, go into the device itself, wait for it to connect, then go to the settings, go to accessibility. Sometimes I find when you press accessibility, it pops up a thing saying you cannot do this right now or something, or this is unavailable. If you just keep pressing it, eventually it comes up, and then enable the screen reader. So now with the screen reader enabled, what you'll find is if you then touch the screen on this device,
2253.
this green border appears, and it'll start reading out what's on the screen. This is just a standard Android screen reader. And this is where it gets interesting, because all the standard Android screen reader and accessibility stuff will now work. So if you draw an L shape on the screen, that opens up this global context menu.
In list, 8 items.
It's going to keep talking and it's getting very annoying.
Tap to act.
But this is the Android sort of accessibility context menu. Now to navigate this, it's a bit weird because you'll try and scroll and it won't work because it's designed for accessibility.
Out of list.
So what you do is you swipe like that,
Cancel.
or yeah, you swipe to the right to go down a list and swipe left to go up a list.
To activate.
So you kind of want to do this. And then to select an item, you double tap. So with this menu open, you want to go down to talkback settings here and double tap.
Talkback settings.
And as soon as you're in here, you can turn off the accessibility options and turn off the screen reader to stop it talking to you. Because it gets a bit annoying and it makes it harder to navigate when you've got to like swipe and stuff. So if you turn off the screen reader now, that'll switch it off. Just did that on the phone. And then you can now see that the green box has gone away. So you can now scroll through here. And now if you come down to here, if you hit privacy policy, oh look, a web browser. The web browser asks to access for various permissions. You need to allow all these. If you don't do that, it'll just go back out and won't let you use the browser. So allow all that. And there we go. We now have a web browser. However, it's not quite that simple. if you click in the address bar, you'll notice something missing. There's no keyboard installed on this device. So before we can really start typing in URLs of apps to download and all that sort of stuff, we need to be able to download a keyboard. But of course, to do that, we need to type in a URL, which you can't do because there's no keyboard. So this is where there's two different ways I figured out of doing this. There's a version on the XDA Developers Forum using the calendar, which lets you enter a URL into your calendar, copy it to the clipboard, and insert it into the browser. Or there's a method that I would have come up with if I was doing this on my own and didn't have the XDA Developers Guide, which would involve creating a custom DNS entry from parts of this URL that I can then go to in a browser by cutting parts of that URL out and then load a web page I'm hosting from my own server. In this video, I'm going to focus on the calendar approach just because it's much more accessible to people. It doesn't require your own DNS servers and web servers and stuff like that. But I'll demonstrate my plan as well, just as an extra option. So as I mentioned, the first thing we need to do is install a keyboard on this. Once we've done that, we can very easily open up the browser, type in all the different URLs to download things like the launcher, and then we're kind of good to go. But we need to install a keyboard. So as I mentioned, we can do this using the calendar. So what you need to do is find a URL that will let you download the APK file for a keyboard. I've used one called Simple Keyboard from the F-Droid website, and I've added it to my calendar there. So you can see I've added an event to my calendar later on. The calendar also needs to be in the future, and I've named the event the URL. What you then want to do is go back in to Google Home, and you want to enable the accessibility features in the screen reader again. So you're going to enable the screen reader like that. Tap screen just check it's working. Yep, screen reader is working. So what I need to do is ask this what's in our calendar. Hey Google, what's in my calendar?
There's one entry for today. At 11:50 p.m, you have https://f-droid.org/n/packages/rkr.simplekeyboard.inputmethod/.
And there you go. So now it's displaying this URL on the screen. This wouldn't work as a link, you couldn't click it. But what you can do is now the screen reader is enabled. You want to tap on the screen.
Web view.
And swipe.
9.
Until it hits the URL. Sometimes it doesn't read it out, I don't know why, but as long as it's highlighted at green, this will work. Because what you then need to do is once that's highlighted, you can then draw the L shape again, which opens up the context menu.
From top,
go down the context menu.
Repeat last, spell last,
until you find copy last utterance to clipboard. Now double tap. That's now copied that URL into the clipboard. Now what we need to do is open up the web browser again. So we go into it with the L shape, exact same as before. You want to go down to talkback settings, double tap.
Talkback settings, talkback settings.
Once we're in talkback settings, we can turn off the talkback through the app again so it doesn't keep talking to me. Go down to open up the browser by clicking privacy policy, and the browser will open up again. But this time we have that URL in the clipboard. So what we can now do is click in the address bar, clear it using the button on the right hand side there, that gets rid of it, tap over here. Some of those Android things are a bit fiddly to try and tap, or you hold down, yep, hold down, paste appears, press paste, there's the URL. Now what I've noticed is it has also stuck a day 1/2 on the end, which is obviously part of the calendar message, so I need to delete that off because that obviously shouldn't be there. But all we need to do is go along like that, select the bit on the end, so remove day 1/1/2. I find the screen's a little fiddly, it's not the best touchscreen in the world. There we go, so we get that there. We're going to take that, we're going to cut that, we're then going to highlight the whole URL again and press open. I'm going to copy it again just so I've got it in the clipboard just in case this goes wrong. And now I'm going to press open. And there you go, that's now loaded a web page that I've specified on this device. So now we can install the keyboard. So for that, what we need to do is scroll down here. This is just the F-Droid website. There's other websites you can get APKs from as well, just F-Droid's relatively trusted. Obviously you don't want to use the download F-Droid button because that will download the F-Droid Marketplace and App Store app. We just want the keyboard, so we're going to scroll down to download the APK, click that. It's now going to say starting download. And you'll now see here, the keyboard is currently downloading, it's a progress thing there, and it's downloaded. So now, if we click that, it'll say for your security you need to allow the browser to install apps, so you need to go to settings, You don't need to do this the first time, but then you can press allow from the source to allow the browser to install apps, go back out of that, press install again, and that's now installing the keyboard. Now you can press open. It'll then ask you to enable it, so you need to press OK, enable the keyboard, press OK to that privacy warning, and that's now got a keyboard enabled. So we can go back again, and we're back into downloads. So now we're back at the downloads folder. If we click the search button here, just test this, we now have a keyboard. So we can actually type into this now, which means that we can install other apps by typing URLs into the browser. So what we now need to do is get back to the browser and this time install a launcher. Now, unfortunately, there's currently no back and next button, so there's no easy way to get out of this and get back into the browser, as you can see. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to use accessibility options again, draw the L shape, and get back into the browser. So again, back into the app on your phone, enable the screen reader again, come down to here, that's now enabled, draw the L shape.
Headings. Alert global.
Scroll through this, talkback settings, into that.
Files. Talkback set.
Turn off the screen reader.
Talkback off.
Down here, and privacy policy. And now we're back into the browser. But now we can type things in to the URL bar. So obviously we've now got a keyboard installed, but as I mentioned, there was another method that I came up with that wasn't the one that was mentioned on XDA Developers. And if someone hadn't mentioned about how using the calendar, this is kind of how I would have done it. So as I mentioned, obviously you've got the URL that loads up here, but there's no keyboard. Now, I have already installed the keyboard obviously, so pretend the keyboard isn't here. Imagine that we've just come in, we've opened the browser for the first time, but we've not installed a keyboard yet, so we want to install a keyboard, so pretend the keyboard isn't here. We're not going to use it even though it shows up. So when you open the browser through the accessibility settings, you get this URL here, which is policy.googles.com. So what I've ended up doing is on my DNS server, I've created a record for a domain that doesn't exist, but it can be made up from parts of this, and I can cut bits out to make it. So the domain I've come up with is polgoo.com, so polgoo.com. It could be anything, but what I want to do is, even though there's no keyboard, just pretend it isn't there, I can, however, highlight bits of this URL, and I can cut them. Try again, that didn't work for some reason. So I can highlight bits of the URL, and I can cut there. So I've now cut off the bit on the end. If I cut out in the middle here, so I can cut out the bit from policies.google there, and then I can get, in hindsight I picked a fairly inconvenient one to use. I find with this screen, the way it works is you kind of need to start dragging a fair bit before it actually starts recognising that you're dragging. It's a bit weird. So this is very fiddly. Okay, so now finally highlighted that middle bit, so we can cut that again. There, and now what I need to do is remove the last bit of Google, so it says Goo instead of Google. Cool, so I've highlighted the GLE there, so I can cut that. And now it's polgoo.com, and because it's on my local network, it's not an SSL domain, so I'll change HTTPS to HTTP just by highlighting the S and cutting that out. There, so that's the S highlighted. So we're gonna hit cut, and there's HTTP polgoo.com, which is on my DNS server. So what we now need to do is press open, and there we go. So that's now resolved on my local DNS server, and it's pointed to a web server that I'm also running on my local network that I can control. Now, on that web server, I've got a page that simply has a link here to the F-Droid marketplace. So what I now need to do is click that, and that will load up F-Droid and allow me to download the keyboard. So ultimately, the calendar approach is much easier. Realistically, you still need to use the Google stuff to set this up anyway, so there's no problem really having the calendar. You're setting up to connect to a Google account anyway, but that's just another way I did it. It just kind of shows my thought process behind this. Setting up a DNS server with a domain that I can make up by cutting parts of the default URL out, and having that point to a web server that I can control, which then has a page that links to the appropriate APKs that I want to download. So that's kind of the other way you could do it there. So yeah, that's it there. But anyway, now we've got the keyboard installed, it's going to install the rest of the stuff. So the next thing to install is a launcher. So we're going to type this into here. It's going to be a bit fiddly, so I'll hold it up to try and type. It's a very weird thing to try and type on like this, but if we go to I'm actually going to go to the F-Droid link that's in the history because that makes it a lot easier. And then we can go back to the home page, and then we can just search on here. So the launcher I'm going to install is called Light Android Launcher. There's a lot of different options you could install. There's much more feature-packed launchers you could install if you wanted home screens with widgets and app drawers and things that pull out that show you news and weather forecasts and all that kind of stuff. You can basically turn this into a full-blown Android launcher if you wanted to. But I'm just going to use light Android launcher just because it is, well, lightweight, and it's very annoying that pops up at the bottom when you're typing, because it's very lightweight, and realistically for this I'm not going to use the launcher much. All I need to do is open apps with it, and once the apps are running, they'll just run, the launcher will just sit in the background. And yeah, it's weird to try and type on this thinking I used to have phones this size and they felt big, and then this feels absolutely tiny. Obviously I've just got used to much bigger phones, but there we go. So light Android launcher, that's what we want to install. Scroll down, and we want to download the APK. Once again, I'm just going to download the APK over here. It's downloaded already, it was very quick. Click that, install, that install. Then you want to press open. You want to always press open, not done, because it'll go back. And there you go. That is now a launcher. So now if you open up here, we now have all of these apps. So we can go through here, these are some of the apps that are installed. There's a few interesting ones like Car BT demo. I'm not going to open it because I can't get back out of it easily. But it's like some sort of like car Bluetooth phone thing. So you can connect the phone, it gives you like a dial pad and allows you to make outbound calls from Bluetooth devices. So I presume this firmware is the sort of thing they'd also use in like in-car entertainment systems. It's interesting. I always find it weird when you break out of the environment on these, there's always little random apps sitting around on them that haven't been taken out from development. But yep, that's the launcher. So this realistically could be a standard Android launcher that would look like you'd expect an Android launcher to look like, with an app drawer and all the apps pinned to it and widgets. It just so happens that this launcher here is a bit of a weird one. It's just much simpler and doesn't really have the same sort of UI, but it is just an Android launcher. So obviously that's now opened up the launcher, but that was just done from the installer. What we now need to do is set this as a default launcher so that when we start up the device, it automatically comes into this, rather than the Google Home environment. So all we need to do for that is just power cycle the device, and when we do that, it will start up, and when it starts up, it will ask you to pick your default launcher, because when it starts up, it'll see you've installed a new launcher, it'll try and execute the default Google Home launcher, but it'll kind of go, by the way, you've already installed this new launcher, do you want to use that instead? So I've connected to power, let's wait for it to boot up. And when it comes up, it should hopefully give us the option to pick the new launcher as default. What I've also found is that after installing the custom launcher, you don't get the boot screen, so don't worry if it just sits on a black screen for ages. The boot screen doesn't seem to work unless it's using the default launcher. I wonder if the default launcher actually creates the boot screen. But now you can see it's asking if I want to use Google Assistant Core as home, which is the standard launcher that it comes with, or the new one. So I want to pick my new launcher, and then I want to press always, so it always opens that launcher. And now it's booted back into this launcher. And now this time, if we power cycle it, unplug it, plug it back in again, drop it, what you'll find is it'll boot up and go straight into the new launcher. And there we go. And again, as I mentioned, it does take a while to boot, and with a custom launcher, it will just sit on a black screen. Just wait for it, it will eventually boot. But as you can see, we're now into our launcher, so that started up automatically into this new launcher. None of the Google Home stuff started up. And as you can see, we can open this here, and it works. However, there's a couple of little extra things we want to do. For example, you'll notice there's no nav bar on this. There's this little thing that pops up from the bottom, which is part of the Lenovo software that kind of lets you change the brightness and volume and that kind of stuff. But there's no standard Android navigation buttons like you get on a phone. So in particular, there's no sort of home and back and next buttons. So the problem with that is that you can very easily get into a state where you can't then get out of it, like I've literally done here. So I can't actually, I don't know what I've opened here, but I can't now get out of this. It's just making me type into a field that I can't then quit. So yeah, I've now managed to do this. And this is the problem where you've not got back and next buttons. You'll get into a thing that you can't get out of. So what I'm just going to do is power cycle that just to get rid of that. And until you've got the home button and next button set up, home and back button set up, you kind of need to restart it quite a lot because you end up doing things like that. There's a couple of different options here you could do. On my in-wall touchscreens that I made a video of, what I did with those was use an app called Navigation Bar for Android that gives an overlay on the screen that looks very much like the default Android navigation bar. However, the reason I did that is because those devices don't have any physical buttons, so you really need something on screen. Whereas this, very helpfully, has two physical buttons on top. You've got the volume down and volume up buttons. And realistically, for my use case of these, I'm never going to use these buttons. It's a shame because this has actually got a really nice speaker, but I'm not really going to have any sound playing out of this. I might do something, but realistically it's not a huge deal not having these volume controls. I'd use it to like make announcements or whatever. It's not really a huge deal. So what I'm going to do is install an app that lets me remap the volume down and volume up buttons to home and back. So then I can actually navigate this device using these as home and back buttons. So there's a bunch of different apps out there. I'm just recommending the ones that I've used that I know work. So the one I'm going to use is called Keymapper. So what we need to do is again open the browser up, again open up F-Droid, and we're going to install the app called Keymapper. So scroll down here, find the apps, Keymapper, search. So that's installed Keymapper. There's a couple of apps. There's Keymapper GUI keyboard that we don't want. It's Keymapper is the one I want. And then we're going to go down here and we're going to install this. So many things to scroll past. Find the APK file, which is there. Download the APK. And exactly as before, let that finish downloading wherever it is. Presume it's that one there, it's most recent downloaded. Click that, install. Installing. And open it. So we then need to go through here, enable the accessibility service, basically follow the on-screen instructions, dead simple. So this lets it kind of control the device a little bit, because obviously Android's very locked down if you don't do things like this. Turn off the power management, because Android has a feature where it'll kill off apps that aren't running, so you kind of need to allow that. Contributing, cool. And now we're in here. So what we now do is map these buttons to back and next. So if we press plus, what you can do is press record trigger, press the button. It will always alter the volume even when it's doing back and next, but it will do the back and next type actions. Now it says Keymapper requires permission to modify do not disturb. This doesn't matter, it's a bit of a red herring. It only means if the device is in do not disturb mode that these buttons, that you need to give Keymapper additional permissions to let these buttons be operated by, be received. But you don't need to worry about that really, so ignore that warning. Don't press any extra buttons when it's recording, because otherwise if you're recording and you press this button multiple times, what you'll end up doing is you have to double press it or whatever. So just press record trigger, press the button once, that's it. That's now recorded, so you go back to actions, add an action, and through here we can scroll down here, navigation, then you can press go back. So go back, save, and ignore the thing about do not disturb mode. What you'll find is volume down means go back. I've gone into that there. Now if I press volume down, it goes back. It always pops up that volume overlay, but other than that, it's fine. So that's worked. Now you want to add one for home, so we add plus. Same thing again, record trigger, press that button once, wait for that countdown to finish before you do anything else, go into actions, add action, navigation, go home, save. Oh, and that was my phone's calendar going off, reminding me that I've got an appointment to download an app. Yeah, that's the one that was in the calendar from earlier. But now I've got another shortcut here, so I've got one to go back, a volume up, so you go home. So if I press volume up, the volume goes up, but it takes me back to the home screen. So now I have the ability to use this device properly and actually navigate it as though you would a normal Android device. You just have the fun where the volume control pops up every time you use the navigation button, but I can now go through here and I can correctly actually navigate it using these as the back and next buttons. So that's ideal. So with this all now installed and working, you can now use this like a normal Android device. So you can open up the app drawer. There, obviously it'll depend on what launcher you've used. Open up the browser. And you can now kind of actually browse it. Because you can open the browser, you can go back home. You can then go back out here, wait for that to disappear for the volume control. Open that again, go back into the browser. But now you can actually navigate properly. You're not just opening up a browser and then stuck in there until you download a file and launch the app. So now you can actually use this device and set it up as you wish. So I'm going to go away now and get this set up to display my Home Assistant dashboard. I'm going to use an app called Wall Panel, which is basically a sort of kiosk style browser. It's designed for that kind of thing, where it will allow you to display a web page without any buttons to easily quit it. And it also has a nice feature where it has a screensaver where it'll show a clock and dim the screen after a period of time, which is exactly what I need for beside the bed. So I'll go away and install that. You've seen how to install apps now. Open up the browser, search for them, download the APK files, install it. So I'll now go away and get that all set up, and we'll come back and take a look at it. And there you go. That's all now set up to display my Home Assistant dashboards. So I've installed an app called Wall Panel on this. I won't go into a huge amount of detail, there's better videos showing that. I don't want this video to be too long, even though it probably will be. But essentially Wall Panel is a web browser designed for systems like this. Essentially, you give it a URL, it will always display that URL. It doesn't have any navigation bars or anything like that, so it kind of keeps you in that kiosk mode. And it has a few nice features that also make it ideal for this setup. In particular, it has this screensaver. So you can set it up to display a screensaver, which in my situation here, after 15 seconds, it will dim the screen and display a clock. And you can easily configure the time, whether it displays a clock or it displays pictures or it just dims the screen. And you can also change things like how much it dims the screen by. So in my case, it'll dim the screen down and display a clock. And if I tap it, it'll brighten up the screen and wake up. Now, one good thing about this device, and it was something that I was a bit worried about, is that even though this does have an LCD screen, it dims really low. My fear with it being LCD is that when it was displaying a clock next to my bed late at night, I'd be able to see the backlight shining through, so I'd end up with like a rectangle that's glowing with a clock in the middle. But this can dim down super low. So as long as you set the brightness low enough, you can have this in a completely dark room and it just looks like a clock. You don't really see the outline of the screen, which is good. Now, as standard, this has some sort of automatic brightness control enabled. That's what that has from Lenovo, and you can turn it on and off in the Android settings. And that generally works pretty well. So in a bright room, it's pretty bright, and in a dark room, it goes so dim that you can just about make out the clock, but not really much more than that. However, for my setup, I found that to be a little bit too aggressive. It's absolutely fine for a clock, but I found that if the lights were off in the room and it was late at night and I just wanted to use this to say turn the lights on or something, I would turn this on, the screen would brighten up, but it would never be bright enough to really make this out. I could do it, but I kind of had to squint to try and see what was on the screen because it was in a dark room. So what I've done instead is I've used the Wall Panel API, so this is all connected up to Node-RED, so that when the lights in my room are on, it sets the brightness on this to one value, and when the lights in the room are off, it sets this to a lower brightness. And then the screensaver itself then dims the screen even further. So I've got the adaptive brightness turned off, and the brightness is being controlled by Node-RED. So currently the bedroom lights are on, so when I wake up, the screen will brighten up to that sort of brightness. I mean, the brightness won't really come across on camera, but it'll light up pretty bright. You can easily see under these studio lights. And then after 15 seconds, when the screensaver kicks in, you'll notice it'll dim down. And that dimming when the screensaver comes on is handled by Wall Panel. So screensaver comes on, brightness dims. However, we can see the Node-RED stuff in action. So if I turn the lights in the bedroom off, you'll notice that the screen will dim. That is the brightness being set by Node-RED. So then when the screensaver comes on, it will dim down even further. That means that this level of brightness of the screen is easy enough to see in a dark room, but it would be a bit too bright to have as a clock. But then when the screensaver kicks on, it'll dim down even further to the perfect sort of brightness to have a clock in a dark room. There you can see the screensaver's come on and it's even dimmer. Then obviously if I tap that to wake it up, the screen will come on, and then I turn the lights back on in the room, the screen's brightness will increase. So that's what I've done there. I've used the Wall Panel API, and well, actually not even the API, I've used MQTT. So Wall Panel connects to MQTT and I can give it commands over that. It also has an HTTP API that I've also enabled. In particular, I've done that because Wall Panel normally has like a settings button in the corner that you click to open up the settings. I don't really want that there, so I've disabled that, which is possible to do in the Wall Panel settings. But if I ever want to get into the settings menu, I need to issue an HTTP command over the API, so I can do that from the computer here. And if I issue that, it will open up the settings pane. So yeah, that's my setup. However, there's one more thing we need to deal with here. And that is that even though we've got a different launcher running, it boots up into this, runs all our custom apps, the original Google stuff is still running in the background. And this has a couple of problems. First of all, the voice assistant will still work, and therefore it will respond to voice commands. So if I say, hey Google, what's the weather like?
It's currently 2 degrees and cloudy there. Friday, it'll be mostly sunny, with a high of 6 and a low of -3. Due to current wind conditions, it feels like it's -2.
So even though it doesn't display anything on the screen, the voice assistant still works. Now, if you're involved in the whole Google ecosystem and you use that sort of stuff, that honestly might be a benefit. You could have your Home Assistant dashboard on here and have the Google Assistant still respond and operate as normal, even though it won't show anything on the screen. However, for me, I don't want that. I don't really use voice assistants in general, so I don't really want to have this. I'm not worried about it spying on me, but I don't really want to have it there. I don't want a situation where someone uses Google's Assistant on their phone or something and this starts responding. So I'd rather have this not respond. Additionally, and we'll talk about this separately, there's two different ways to do it. I also would rather this didn't access the internet. That's because my fear is that if this decides to do an update, it presumably has some sort of over-the-air update mechanism, this could update itself and potentially either reset all the stuff I've done here and go back to normal, or even remove the glitch or the feature that lets you get into this install a custom launcher, and I could lock myself out. So ideally I don't want to do that. So we'll look at a couple of different methods. First of all, how we can just stop the Google Assistant responding, and then how we can block this from accessing the internet, because it's not as simple as I initially hoped, but it is perfectly possible. So to stop the Google Assistant listening, it's very easy. There's a microphone mute button on the back. All you need to do is slide it across.
The mic is muted.
And it'll mute. However, what you'll notice is it'll display this microphone symbol in the corner, and that'll display over everything, and you can't get rid of that. Well, you can, but it doesn't disappear. It won't disappear automatically, which is a little bit annoying. So if you want to get rid of that, you can do it. What you need to do is you need to kill off one of the services that's running a lot of the Google Assistant stuff that's running in the background. Unfortunately, you can't permanently disable services or remove those apps. They're kind of baked into it, and it's not rooted, so you can't really remove things that you shouldn't. It doesn't want you to remove, but you can kill the service that's doing this, so it won't continue to show it. So to do that, we need to go into Settings, and you need to go into Developer Options. So if you've not already enabled that on Android, what you need to do is go into About Phone, go down to the build number, tap the build number, it'll say you're now a developer, you tap it a few times. With that done, that's now done globally, that'll last forever. You can then go into System, Advanced Options, Developer Options, scroll down to Running Services, and in here you'll find a service called Assistant Core. You then click that service, click Stop, and then accept that. Now that service will have stopped. So now when you go home again, you'll see that even though the microphone's muted, it will no longer show the icon. So I can control the microphone icon in the back, or control the microphone switch, like that, and it doesn't do anything. So I can mute the microphone and the symbol won't show up, which is kind of ideal. So that's probably the best way. If you just don't want it to listen, you can do that. However, that setting isn't persistent. So every time it restarts, the symbol will pop up again. You'll need to go in Settings, Developer Options, kill that service, and the symbol will disappear again. And to be honest, that's not too painful to do, so that is a perfectly viable option. However, the only other thing to bear in mind is that by killing that service, what you've also killed is the little pull-up bar that you had at the bottom, which is quite nice to have. It let you adjust the screen brightness and stuff and the volume without using the buttons on the top that are now remapped for back in Next, or back in Home. So that's perfectly fine. However, that's not what I'm going to do here. And that's because, as I mentioned, I want to have this blocked off the internet as well. So let's take a look at how we do that. Okay, so to avoid this accessing the internet, what I've done is I've set up with a static IP address that I did anyway, so I could use the API on it, and I've added that IP address into my firewall, so this is completely blocked from accessing the internet. I actually already had that set up for other IoT devices. A lot of my sort of flashed random IoT devices that only need local network access are explicitly blocked from accessing the internet, so I've just added it into that rule there. So now if we turn it on, you'll see it'll start up, but this time it won't be able to connect out to the internet. However, when it turns on, you'll see why it's not as simple as just blocking it in the firewall. So let's wait for it to start up and we'll see what the issue is. So as you can see, it started up there, all looks good so far. But if we wait a second, what you'll see is it pops up the symbol in the corner of the screen saying that the network's disconnected. So now it can't connect to the internet, but you've essentially got the same issue as you had with the microphone being muted. It displays a permanent symbol in the corner of the screen, which isn't ideal. However, this kind of initially made me think that that's okay. All I'll do is I'll just kill that service, get rid of that. It'll basically be the same as having the microphone disabled, but it will also mean that it can't talk out to the internet, so it prevents any updates or anything.
The mic's back on.
And then it also pops this up, but you can close that, and once you've closed that, you can use it normally. It works fine. And if you do stop that Assistant Core service, that symbol disappears. So I thought, well, that's great. However, it was actually only a couple of days later, I went into my laptop's Wi-Fi settings just to connect to a different Wi-Fi network. And I saw a suspicious unsecured network called Bedroom Clock Q003. So what seems to happen is when this can't connect out to the internet and it doesn't detect an internet connection, it then starts broadcasting a Wi-Fi network, which is actually unsecured. I suspect it's so that you could then take the Google Home app, and the Google Home app can then find this and let you reconnect it. So the idea would be, if you've got your clock, you've changed your router, you've moved house, whatever, and this can't connect to the Wi-Fi, it allows you to take your Google Home app out and reconnect this clock to your Wi-Fi network. However, obviously I don't want it to do that. Now, obviously I don't quite know how separated that unsecured network is from my main network or whatever, but the last thing I want is some random Android device on my network broadcasting an unsecured Wi-Fi network while simultaneously being connected to my main network, because that's not very good. So obviously that's not going to fly. Now, if you wanted to stop it broadcasting, what you can do is, if you go into the Android settings on the device, down here into the main Android settings, you can then go into Network and Internet, Hotspot and Tethering. You'll see that it is actually broadcasting under Wi-Fi hotspot. You'll see it's broadcasting their bedroom clock Q003 with no security, and you can turn off that hotspot. That does work. However, as soon as the device reboots, the hotspot will turn on again. I've also tried things like setting a security key or enabling turn off hotspot automatically, but both those settings aren't persistent across reboots. So with this type of setup, as soon as the clock rebooted, it would start broadcasting an unsecured network again if it can't reach out to the internet. So that's not really a good solution. It would work, but the problem is, obviously, if I'm away and there's a power cut or whatever, it's going to start doing it, or if I just forget. So I didn't really want to do that. So I did come up with a solution for this, and it's what I'll be using going forwards. However, it is a little bit complicated. So if you've got servers and the ability to run VMs and containers and all that sort of stuff and change DNS entries, absolutely go for it, it will work. But it's maybe not the easiest solution for people who are just wanting to set this up and not really have an overcomplicated network behind it. So the way Android checks for an active internet connection is it uses a service at the domain connectivitycheck.gstatic.com, which is operated by Google. It issues requests to that domain, and obviously it looks at the response from those, and it will determine if there's an active internet connection. And in particular, if you care about the details, I think it sends an HTTP request to connectivitycheck.gstatic.com/generate_204, and it expects to receive an HTTP 204 response. The idea behind this is it also looks for things like captive portals. If it issues that request and it sees a redirect or something that's not a 204 response, it knows that there's some sort of captive portal jumping in there trying to get you to log into Wi-Fi. So yeah, that's what it does. And that's all this needs to all that needs to succeed is that, and this will think it has an internet connection. However, it's not necessarily as simple as just allowing that single IP address through my firewall, because that IP address seems to change. It's just a standard Google IP. In fact, even if you get an IP address for like youtube.com and then go to that IP address /generate_204, it will return a 204 response code. It seems to just be something that Google have on all their Edge web servers that handle that. So the IP address isn't going to be consistent. So one thing you could do is set up a static entry so that connectivitycheck.gstatic.com always points to the same IP address that's run by Google, and allow that IP address through your firewall. And that does work. However, there's still always a slight chance, even a tiny little one, that one of the DNS records for, say, connecting to Google Home or all the Google APIs also returns that same IP address that's allowed through your firewall, because they're just standard Google web server IPs, they're not specific to services. And at that point, this would be allowed to connect out to the internet. That's very rare, but it could happen. So instead, the solution I came up with was to set up a small virtual machine on my server. This could easily be some sort of Docker container or anything else, but I just set up a small FreeBSD virtual machine, tiny little thing, 256 megs of RAM, single core, and what it runs is a DNS server and HA proxy. The DNS server is just a standard DNS server, however it has a single override entry for connectivitycheck.gstatic.com. And for that particular domain, instead of returning the Google IP address, it returns the IP address of that virtual machine. And then this clock is set up to resolve against that custom DNS server on that VM. So when this tries to make a DNS request, it gets all the IP addresses back normally, unless it requests the connectivity check domain, at which point it receives the IP address of the virtual machine on my local network. Then running on that virtual machine, I have HA proxy, which is a TCP proxy. And that proxy is both port 80 HTTP traffic, as well as port 443 HTTPS traffic through to the connectivity check service. And then because that virtual machine isn't restricted to my firewall, that virtual machine can connect out to the internet and can talk to the Google Connectivity Check service. So essentially what that means is that this clock will start up, it'll make a bunch of network requests, including one to the Connectivity Check service. All the normal network requests to all the Google Home stuff will fail because they'll get an IP address that's on the public internet, try and connect to it, it'll be blocked by the firewall, and it won't work. However, when it wants to make the Connectivity Checks request, it will request the IP address, it'll get a local IP address which it can connect to, it'll connect that local IP address, HA proxy will forward that request through to the Google Connectivity Check service, the response will come back to this, and it will see an active internet connection. And with that, it won't flash up this error in the corner of the screen, and it won't broadcast that unsecured network. So what I'll do now is I'll change the DNS server that this is resolving against to that virtual machine, start HA proxy, and then we'll restart this and it should start up and think there's an active internet connection. And we're back, so the DNS server on this has now been changed. I've started HA proxy, so it's all set up. So this is kind of how it'll be set up when I go live with it and start using it. So if we turn the clock on, wait for it to start up, what it'll now do is it'll start up, it won't be able to connect out to the internet, however the Connectivity Check service will still successfully see an internet connection, and it won't display that warning and it won't broadcast that unsecured network. So let's just wait for this to start up it and see what happens. So as you can see, it started up there. However, it sees an active internet connection. I've had a couple of times, yeah, it sort of briefly shows a little no internet connection thing there for a second, but then it disappears. I think that's it just connecting to the Wi-Fi. But as you can see, it now sees an active internet connection, so it's not throwing up any warnings. However, we can see if we look on the back, the microphone is enabled. If I try and issue a command to it, hey Google, what's the weather like? It's dead, it doesn't do anything. So that's not now running any sort of, it's not listening, well, it's still probably got the app listening, but it can't connect out to the server, so it's not doing anything. Likewise, if we were to say open up the web browser on this, just to prove it is definitely not able to connect to the internet, go to browser. If we open up the web browser, we try and go to like a website on here, you get a weird random set of sort of predefined URLs in the browser as well. It's a bit interesting. If we go to say BBC website there, you'll see that it actually will not work. You know, it'll hang for ages trying to connect, but you can see here that even though it's not showing that warning, it doesn't seem to think it's not got an internet connection. As you can see, there is no active internet connection. This cannot connect out to the internet, which is what we want. And this isn't broadcasting that unsecured network. So I'm basically happy to sort of leave it running like this. However, if we go to connectivitycheck.gstatic.com, you'll see there it pulls up a 404 page. But this is where it's now sent that request to my local HA proxy, and that's forwarded the request out to the Connectivity Check service, and that just returns a 404 when you make a request to it. So that is working. So the Connectivity Check works, but there is no regular typical outbound internet access. Now what this means is that if I want to, I can realistically leave this running like this with a microphone enabled, which means it won't show that warning in the corner of the screen. Because, and I'm kind of happy to do that, because it's, yes, the microphone is currently enabled, but it can't connect out to the internet, it can't do anything with what it's hearing. So I can leave the microphone enabled, which then means there isn't a warning in the corner of the screen, which then means I don't need to disable that assistant core service. Essentially that just means it's easier to work with, because when I turn on the power, it'll start up, I can have it automatically open up the wall panel app, but I don't then need to kill any services or do anything to get it working. It'll just start up and be ready to go straight away. But also, by leaving the assistant core service enabled, what that also means is I can use this little pull-up bar at the bottom of the screen and come in here and do things like adjust the brightness or adjust the volume, which is nice to have because obviously I don't want to be using these buttons because these are remapped back to home and back. So I can actually use this if I want to control these things here. So that's actually really nice. So I think for me, this is how I'm going to let mine run, is I'm going to have it set up with that virtual machine. I'll maybe try and build it in some sort of my existing Docker environment or something, so I'm not having to run a dedicated VM for it. But I'll have this set up with that virtual machine where it's resolving DNS against it to trick the Connectivity Check service into working. And while it does seem a bit overkill to have an entire virtual machine running that just to make my clock work, it's the sort of thing that I can see myself having issues with other Android devices where I want to trick the Connectivity Check service and block them from accessing the internet. So having that there will be useful because it means basically any IoT device that I mod like this that throws an error when it can't get an internet connection, I can actually trick it to think it's got an active internet connection. So that actually works fine. So yeah, bit of a convoluted way of doing it, But essentially with this, you've realistically got kind of two options. Either disable the microphone on the switch at the back, go into the settings, kill that assistant core service, and that way you can have it with the microphone disabled, use the device normally, and it won't be able to listen to you or respond to voice commands. However, it will still be able to connect out to the internet and may try and do over-the-air updates or something. Alternatively, you could just leave the microphone enabled and actually use it as a voice assistant, but not something I really want to do. Or if you want to block it completely off the internet, allowing you to leave the microphone enabled but still have it not listen and not have to worry about the screen overlays or killing any services, you can do it. You just need to do my overcomplicated approach of setting up some sort of custom DNS server to catch that connectivity check domain and redirect it to some sort of proxy that proxies out to the connectivity check service, allowing this to see an active internet connection and talk to the connectivity check service while it's still blocked from directly accessing the internet. So yeah, a couple of different options there. Definitely a bit of a pain, but well worth it for how good this device is. And yeah, it's worth mentioning that I also did check to see if you could just disconnect the microphones internally. I suppose it would be possible, however, it's not that easy to take apart. I've not tried it, but apparently there are some screws in the bottom that take the bottom off. But to actually get the main body out, what you have to do is unclip the screen. The screen comes off, and then there's some screws in here you need to remove. And I tried unclipping the screen, but it's really tight, and I'm worried I would damage it cosmetically, so I didn't want to do that. I think maybe if you could get that out, you could then take the microphones off. However, there seems to be a board on the top of the screen that has both the microphones and the ambient light sensor on it, and that's connected with a single ribbon cable. So if you were just to unplug that, you'd also lose the ambient light sensor. I suppose you can maybe take it and physically desolder the microphones, or just shove something in them and damage the microphones and break them so they don't work. But I would generally say, yeah, it's not that easy just to physically disconnect the microphones. It's not like it's a simple cable to disconnect. So there you go. That's a look at how to install custom apps on this Lenovo Smart Clock 2. And while it is a bit of a weird, convoluted process, it's also quite fun to see how you can sort of bypass the sort of walled garden of these devices and get around them using really weird workarounds. And after all that effort, I am so happy with this. It's just such a nice device to have beside my bed, and it's so much nicer than some sort of homemade system with one of those in-wall touchscreens in a case, or just using a sort of wall-mounted tablet or something. It just looks elegant, because having this thing beside a bed, it looks like it's meant to be there, because it is a off-the-shelf commercial well-made product. But then I have this now with my Home Assistant dashboard, so I can wake up there, it shows a nice clock at night, then I can wake this up, control the lighting in the bedroom. I've got the alarm clock I built here that I mentioned, so I can come into here, and I set this up. It needs a bit of polishing, it's very much a prototype right now, but I can set a time, I can set a delay, and what it'll do is over that delay period, which is currently 30 minutes, it will very slowly increase the light level in the room over that period of time until my wake up time. And it really does seem to help me wake up, so that's really nice. So I've kind of built that there, but of course I very much want to improve that and expand it. I can go into here, I can set things like the colours for the lighting as well. This is all just done through Home Assistant. It's the exact same dashboard as I have on the on-wall touchscreen and on my phone. I just now have it in a bedside clock form. Additionally, once I do more advanced AV stuff, I'm going to do some more advanced AV stuff in the bedroom, so stay tuned for that. I'll have an option on here to control things like that, so it'll be really, really cool to have. And it is just such a nice device, so I'm so happy with this. So yeah, hopefully you found this video interesting or useful if you're going to try and do this yourself. I think the only disclaimer I would say is bear in mind this is very much using a bit of a sort of bodge or a bug or whatever in the software on this. So it's entirely possible that Lenovo might release clocks. If they are still making these, they may release clocks with an update that doesn't allow you to do this. Or if you are allowing yours to access the internet, it may be a case that an update will come out that will roll it back to how it should be and won't let you do this. So don't go and spend too much money on hundreds of these and then get upset if it doesn't work. But this is my experience with one of them, and it's worked really well. So yeah, thank you very much for watching.